I call the member for Hasler.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise to support the Education Services for Overseas Students Legislation Amendment Bill. I had the privilege of working in two jurisdictions in which I also had an association with institutions that provided for overseas students. And what I found most rewarding was that these young people would come to Australia, would study here and then go back to their home countries, but they took back messages about the quality of life, the strength of the way in which they had opportunities here that enabled them to acquire the skills necessary for the disciplines that they went into, but also it gave them the opportunity of going into tertiary pathways. And I welcome the bill because it will strengthen the registration criteria for providers of educational services to overseas students and introduce a risk management approach to the regulation of these providers. And that's critical in terms of the viability to the economy of Australia and also in terms of protecting students. We must not forget that education is now Australia's third biggest export sector, generating $18.6 billion in 2009 and supporting approximately 125,000 jobs across this country. It is therefore a substantial area of our economy. It is an area that I hope that we will continue to expand and provide opportunities for overseas students consistent with the direction that we established under the Colombo Plan. In 1990, Australia certainly welcomed 47,000 international students. By 2000, this number had grown to 188,000. In 2009, nearly 500,000 students were studying in Australia, with more than 360,000 starting their courses in that year. Our international students come from 190 countries, from major cities and remote villages. And what that brings with it is the richness of diversity, the richness of an understanding that reflects the culture from which they come, but also enables people within our own universities and educational institutions to acquire an understanding of another culture that is rich in so many facets of their art, their dance, customs, and certainly in the foods. I strongly endorse Schedule 2, Item 2, which provides for the amendments for the creation of an Ombudsman Act in 1976 to establish an overseas student ombudsman within the Office of the Commonwealth Ombudsman, as proposed under Section 19Z(1). The proposal to establish an overseas students ombudsman within the Office of the Commonwealth Ombudsman will provide overseas students with an avenue to have their concerns and grievances addressed which they have not previously had. I think that is critical in the sense of providing the integrity that is required in both providing a sense of surety in a student's year of study or in their course of study, but also knowing that they have an independent umpire to which they can appeal in those instances where they believe that there is an issue that is of real concern to them and that can be addressed as opposed to being addressed exclusively by the educational provider, where the educational provider may not be supportive of the grievance or the concerns they raise. But equally, it sends a strong message to the providers and agents that the Australian government is committed to a strong and vibrant overseas education sector. It also sends a strong message to overseas students that they are welcomed and valued for the contribution that they make to Australia whilst they're studying here. We have all been exposed to media reports of unethical behaviour within the sector. Colleges closing, which meant lost fees and incomplete courses of study, leaving students in limbo, leaving and creating uncertainty. We're all familiar with the assaults on individual Indian students in their community, which has also caused problems within the international community. However, it is not uniform in its practice, and to Australia's credit, we've demonstrated that they are always welcome to provide the opportunities. We will always occasionally have those people who, for different reasons, choose to single out individuals for the wrong purposes altogether. These issues may have tarnished Australia's image and may have been reflected in commentary, but our response as a nation and by government has been very strong, and This now provides an avenue for those students who have experiences like that to seek the assistance of an ombudsman. That student grievances have included personal welfare concerns. They have included housing, employment and transport. And the complaints about the quality of education provided and about the administrative practice of education providers, the ethical standards of immigration and education. I had the privilege of being Pro-Chancellor of Edith Cowan University, where we certainly targeted full fee paying students from overseas to be involved and to enrol in our particular disciplines that we were expanding. But equally, as a university, we were wanting to contribute back to the development of an overseas country, creating opportunities for the growth and the development of human capital so that the skills acquired within Australia would be commensurate to the skills within the region, but equally in the long term that overseas students may also be attracted back to vacancies that occur within our own country, contributing to the economy, and in the long term contributing to the population within Australia. I read with interest the Council of Australian Government's International Student Strategy for Australia 2010 to 2014 when it was released, because of my prior work within the education sector, and more recently because of the work being undertaken by the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Health and Ageing, in which we have overseas trained doctors who come with experience but are required to go through a process that checks and tests the rigour of their training. It would have been easier, in many senses, for them to have studied and trained here, because they would have left university with qualifications of the nature that we require for the registration of the profession. And certainly as doctors, even though they are caught within a process, contribute very strongly to the provision of health services within rural and remote regions of Australia. The growth of the overseas student sector in the long term has the capacity to provide those skills shortages that we will be faced with as the mining sector continues to grow. In 2009, the Commonwealth Government also brought forward a review of the Education Services for Overseas Students Act and its associated acts and regulations. On 9 March 2010, the Commonwealth Government released the Education Services for Overseas Students Act Review Report, Stronger, Simpler, Smarter Education Services for Overseas Students, supporting international students, and agreed to begin work to implement some of the recommendations immediately. The report made a number of recommendations with two central themes: ensuring students are better supported through improved information, management of education agents, stronger consumer protection mechanisms, and enhanced support to study and live in Australia, including having the opportunity to go when problems arose to an individual. Improving regulation of Australia's international education sector and ways to streamline education services for overseas students to ensure Australia maintained its reputation as a high-quality study destination. I'm sure that the proposed changes that have been put forward will enhance the industry that we are developing. And that is, the principal purpose of providers will be to provide education, to have a demonstrated capacity to provide education of a satisfactory standard that doesn't diminish nor damage Australia's reputation in the provision of education for overseas students, that they will be required to demonstrate access to financial resources, that they have a sustainable business model, and that they have the capability of providing the education programs that students enrol for, and governance and management structures to support the delivery of education of a satisfactory standard. Naturally, the increase of student numbers has resulted in growing numbers of international education providers, which has resulted in opportunistic arrangements whereby some operators establish institutions which collapsed, leaving overseas students without a learning institution and out of pockets because refunds were not possible. When I was researching this matter, I was impressed by the following, which appeared in an official Australian government webpage, and it encourages an overseas student to enrol and study in Australia, to start your journey, and the points they made was live Australia is one of the best places in the world to live while you learn. The standard of living is amongst the highest in the world, yet costs remain competitive. On your breaks from study, you will have a wide choice of activities to enrich your experience, from cultural festivals, concerts and museums to major sporting events. Learn. Australian education has strong international reputation for excellence. Whether you study at university, school, vocational or English Language Institute, you will receive quality education that will form a strong foundation for your future success. Grow. The benefits of living and learning in Australia are both personal and academic. Your years in Australia will give you the best platform to succeed in your career and prepare you for the challenges of the workplace. It won't be just your mind that develops. Your time in the classroom will change you as a person. I liked what I read, and let me say I would be tempted to enrol and study in Australia if I was an overseas student. I support the proposed changes to the Education Services for Overseas Students Act 2000 and the Ombudsman Act 1976, which will further strengthen the registration requirements for education providers in delivering to overseas students with specific focuses on business sustainability, introduce a consistent risk management approach to the regulation of international education, limit the period of registration and allowing conditions to be placed on a provider's registration according to risk, to extend the range of non-compliant behaviour that could attract financial penalties to strengthen the regulation, but also to expand the role of the Commonwealth Ombudsman. It is Australia's third largest source of export income and it needs to be protected and enhanced. And I therefore compliment the government on the legislation, and I support a high-quality experience for international students to ensure a sustainable future for both the quality of international education in Australia, but ultimately for the region in which we are part of, and then ultimately for Australia's economy, with the opportunity of having students who've acquired the skills within our institutions that provide them with a pathway of learning and a pathway of experience that is underpinned by quality providers, underpinned by the fact of providing students with a richness that will not be forgotten, and ultimately they become ambassadors for our great country. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.